we're talking about how could the examiners miss it? How could the regulators miss it? What strikes me as interesting is when the stories come out and the frauds come out and we're examining how it happened, how many times examiners or regulators were presented with things where not only should they have said, don't do this is dishonest, this is a fraud, this is a bad thing, but it looks like they never even pick up the phone to the local FBI office and say, we need a criminal investigation.
Maybe you could look and see, wow, it's taking us 3 years on average in insider trading cases to go from opening the investigation to bringing the case. Maybe we should set as a goal for the division getting that done in 2 years. Upon opening anything, the deputy had to be informed, and the deputy had to determine, is it something that should be investigated, and who should be investigating it, and something about the priority. The staff does not have the resources to thoroughly investigate every options backdating incident. If there's 150 of them, they don't have those resources. So what you try to do is you get audit committees and companies to behave responsibly by hiring counsel that has an obligation to thoroughly investigate, report back to untainted people, perhaps on the audit committee, and look into whether or not there was misbehavior, illegal acts, working with the audit firm often, and making sure remedial action is taken, and then letting the government know about the results of that investigation.
You're probably processing, let's say, in the order of 300-400 million transactions a day. And the name Cuba happens to come in to a phrase somewhere in the payments mechanism. Could be Cuba, New York. As long as that character string shows up, it's going to be a track in that payments mechanism. Theoretically, you could have 1,000 innocent transactions, but they all have the word Cuba in them, so they all get blocked. So now you have 1,000 payments transactions that are locked up in the system that have to go out. Somebody has to figure out whether these are fish or fowl. So these are some of the technological challenges that you have. It's not just as easy to say, well, the bank's system. There is no bank's system. You're trying to understand what it is that you're searching for. So structuring isn't that hard. If people are setting up cash transactions that are 9,000, 9,500, 9,900, it kind of pops out pretty easily. But if you find that some of the terrorist activity that we saw from the 9/11 work, they're smart enough to know that they're going to be under the radar screen. The transactions are $1,200, $2,200, $500.
Government was not wanting to put any brakes on the loaning practices, partially because its gross domestic product was going to be able to increase, and it looked good for the economy, it looked good for whoever was in office. We put our trust into so many checks and balances, and those checks and balances can be dissuaded partially because of the reputation of a person.
Here is the SEC finding that somebody lied to them in their investigation. That in and of itself is a crime. Martha Stewart went to jail for 6 months for that. You look at the annual statement and the semi-annual statement of Stanford. I don't know if any of you have looked at it. I mean, it's very polished. It's a very glossy, high-end piece of work. But if you had any critical, facility about you, you'd want to start asking questions. One of them is you're audited once a year by the Financial Regulatory Authority of Antigua.
Those types of cases, it's even more harder to detect, and it's even more harder to prosecute and report on that, because the actual records themselves show that trading was done or the monies were invested. But how do you get to the root of that and determine whether that's all a lie, whether in fact those funds and monies were actually invested and traded, especially when the periodic reports that those entities may file with the regulatory authorities are false. They're making false representations about whether investor funds were actually invested.
We look at the case of Bernie Madoff. Everyone knows he was the chairman of NASDAQ. And if I was going to look for someone to help me invest my money, what better credentials would I look for than someone who was the chairman of NASDAQ?
Don't forget that with Madoff, the SEC found, all right, Markopoulos, if I'm pronouncing it right, kept bugging them. They did an investigation. They didn't apparently do what they should have done, as full as they should have done, but they did an investigation and found that he had lied to them, okay? And yet, nobody knows, as far as I'm aware, the FBI, nobody at the SEC called the FBI.